A routine flight from London to New York takes a deadly turn when an explosion rips through the engine, sending the plane hurtling toward a remote jungle. Among the terrified passengers is Malcolm Carter, a veteran firefighter who offers to help, but the flight crew refuses to listen. When the plane crashes, chaos erupts. With the captain unconscious and the cabin engulfed in flames, the same people who dismissed Malcolm now beg for his help. But as he fights to save lives, he uncovers something far worse than the wreckage itself. A hidden passenger, a mysterious duffel bag, and men willing to kill to keep its contents a secret. The survivors soon realize this crash wasn't an accident. And the people who caused it? They're still out there, watching, hunting. Can Malcolm and the others escape before it's too late? Or will the truth die with them in the jungle? Let us know where in the world you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling stories like this. Malcolm Carter adjusted his seatbelt and sighed, resting his head against the cold airplane window. Flight 297 from London to New York had taken off smoothly, and the hum of the engines blended with the low chatter of passengers. He wasn't one for flights. Not because of fear. Malcolm had run into burning buildings before, facing risks far greater than turbulence. It was the feeling of helplessness, of being trapped in a confined space, dependent on others. As a firefighter, he was always in control. Up here, at 30,000 feet, he had none. A flight attendant strolled down the aisle, offering drinks. Malcolm declined. Across from him, a businessman in a tailored suit took a sip of whiskey, occasionally tapping away at his laptop. "You're military?" the man asked, eyeing Malcolm's broad shoulders and upright posture. "Firefighter," Malcolm replied, keeping his voice even. The businessman smirked. "Guess you won't have much to do up here, then." Malcolm didn't reply. He had learned long ago that some people saw his uniform as a badge of honor, while others dismissed it as nothing more than a glorified maintenance job. He turned his attention to the family seated a few rows ahead. A mother and her young son. The boy, no older than 7, clutched a small toy plane in his hands, his face pressed against the window. The mother, however, looked nervous. Her fingers tapped anxiously against her tray table. Then it happened. A loud explosion thundered from the right side of the aircraft. The plane lurched violently, sending drinks and trays flying. The cabin lights flickered. Passengers screamed. The intercom crackled. "This is your captain speaking." The pilot's voice was strained, controlled, but filled with urgency. "We have lost an engine. We are declaring an emergency and preparing for an emergency landing. Flight attendants, secure the cabin." Malcolm's grip tightened around the armrest. He had been in enough life-or-death situations to recognize the thin edge of panic in the pilot's voice. The businessman beside him had gone pale. "An engine failure? That's bad, right?" Malcolm unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. "I can help." A flight attendant, a blonde woman in her early 40s, immediately stepped in front of him. "Sir, I need you to remain seated." "I'm a firefighter," Malcolm said, his voice firm but calm. "I've been trained for emergencies." Her expression hardened. "With all due respect, sir, this is a plane emergency, not a fire." Passengers turned to watch. The businessman gave Malcolm an amused glance. "Sit down, hero," he said, smirking. "You don't fly planes." Malcolm exhaled, forcing himself to stay composed. He looked at the attendant. "I know you have protocols, but when this plane lands, things are going to get bad. I have experience in disaster response." The attendant pursed her lips. "Sir, we have everything under control." The plane suddenly dropped. People screamed. Luggage compartments burst open. Oxygen masks dangled uselessly. A child cried out, the boy with the toy plane. His mother clutched him tightly, whispering reassurances that sounded far from certain. Malcolm turned back to the flight attendant, his patience gone. "You don't have this under control," he said, his voice low. "And you're going to regret ignoring me." The plane kept falling. The plane plunged again, sending Malcolm crashing back into his seat. A collective gasp filled the cabin as passengers gripped their armrests, their faces frozen in terror. Overhead compartments burst open, raining down bags and loose belongings. A woman screamed as a suitcase barely missed her head. Malcolm's instinct screamed at him to move, but the flight attendant still stood firm, her hands gripping the back of the seat in front of him for balance. "Sir, please remain seated," she repeated, but this time her voice shook. The businessman beside Malcolm clutched his armrests like a lifeline, his knuckles white. Gone was the smug smirk, replaced by raw, unfiltered fear. "We're gonna crash," he muttered under his breath. "Oh God, we're gonna crash." Malcolm wasn't about to waste time arguing. He turned to the window and caught a glimpse of thick forest below, growing closer by the second. The plane's right wing smoldered, black smoke trailing behind. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, barely masking his tension. "Brace for impact. I repeat, brace for impact." The cabin erupted in pure panic. A woman sobbed uncontrollably. A man gripped a cross around his neck, whispering frantic prayers. The young boy, with the toy plane, clung to his mother, his wide eyes darting around as if searching for a way out. Malcolm braced himself just as the ground came rushing toward them. Then, impact. The force of the landing slammed Malcolm forward. The plane screeched and groaned, its metal belly scraping against the earth as it tore through trees. Seats ripped free from their bolts. Overhead panels collapsed, showering passengers in debris. For a moment, the world was nothing but smoke, noise, and pain. Then silence. Malcolm forced his eyes open. His ears rang from the deafening impact, his vision blurred by the thick haze of smoke filling the cabin. Somewhere, a child was crying. A woman groaned in pain. The businessman beside him was motionless, slumped forward. Malcolm reached over, pressing 2 fingers to the man's neck. A pulse weak, but there. The seatbelt sign flickered, the dim emergency lights casting eerie shadows through the wreckage. Malcolm turned his head. The right side of the plane was in flames. No time to hesitate. He unbuckled his seatbelt and pushed himself up, ignoring the sharp pain radiating through his ribs. The flight attendant who had blocked him earlier was pinned beneath a collapsed section of the overhead bin, struggling to free herself. Their eyes met. Her expression shifted from authority to helplessness. "Help me," she whispered. Malcolm didn't hesitate. He bent down, wedging his hands beneath the debris. With a grunt of effort, he pushed harder, harder, until the weight shifted just enough for her to crawl free. She gasped for air, coughing through the smoke. Thank you." Malcolm barely spared her a glance before turning to the rest of the cabin. The mother and child were trapped behind a collapsed row of seats. A man, still belted in, wasn't moving. Smoke thickened, making it harder to breathe. And then a new voice, desperate and pleading. "Somebody help. The captain, he's unconscious." Malcolm turned toward the cockpit. The co-pilot, a young woman with a bleeding gash on her forehead, was stumbling toward the main cabin. "The door, it's jammed," she gasped. "I can't get to him." Malcolm looked back at the flames. They were spreading fast. Every second counted. His jaw tightened. The crew had ignored him when he had offered help. But now they were looking at him like he was their only hope. Because he was. Malcolm moved fast. The wreckage was a death trap, the thick smoke curling through the shattered cabin, choking the oxygen from the air. Flames licked at the fuselage, creeping closer to the passengers still trapped in their seats. His firefighter instincts kicked in. Assess. Prioritize. Act. The co-pilot, her face pale beneath streaks of blood, clutched her injured arm. "We need to get to the cockpit," she rasped. "If the fire reaches the fuel lines, we won't have time to worry about a rescue." Malcolm finished for her. "The whole plane will go up in flames." He turned to the flight attendant he had just freed. She was still coughing, wide-eyed with shock, but he needed her focused. "What's your name?" he asked. She blinked. "Lisa." "Lisa, I need you to check on the injured. Help anyone who can still move and get them toward the exits. Now." Lisa hesitated. She had dismissed him before, treating him like just another passenger. But now there was no question who was in control. She nodded quickly. "Okay." Malcolm pushed past the debris, reaching the crumpled cockpit door. It was wedged shut, likely bent from the impact. The heat from a fire was increasing, the smell of burning metal thick in the air. He turned to the co-pilot. "Stand back." Planting his feet, Malcolm rammed his shoulder against the door. Pain exploded through his side, but the door barely budged. He gritted his teeth and hit it again, harder. The third time, something gave. The door burst open, revealing the smoke-filled cockpit. The captain was still in his seat, head slumped forward, blood trickling from a wound above his temple. Sparks flew from the damaged control panel, casting eerie flashes of red and orange across the cramped space. Malcolm rushed in, unbuckling the captain's restraints. The man was unconscious, but breathing. "We've got him," Malcolm called over his shoulder. The co-pilot stumbled forward to help, but her injury made it difficult. Malcolm hoisted the captain over his shoulder and turned boom. A section of the right wing exploded, sending a shock wave through the plane. The impact knocked Malcolm off balance, and the co-pilot screamed as part of the ceiling collapsed behind them, cutting off the exit. Malcolm hit the floor hard, his back slamming against a broken seat. The captain's weight threatened to crush him, but he refused to let go. No. Time for pain. The fire was spreading faster than he expected. The walls trembled, groaning under the heat. "If they didn't get out now, Malcolm." Lisa's voice. He looked up and saw her, standing at the torn opening of the cabin, a makeshift rope of seatbelts in her hands. "Grab on," she shouted. Malcolm gritted his teeth, adjusting the unconscious captain across his shoulder. One shot at this. Summoning every ounce of strength, he pushed off the ground, gripping the seatbelt rope as Lisa and another passenger pulled him up. The co-pilot followed, collapsing onto the floor in a fit of coughing. "We've got him," Lisa gasped, as Malcolm laid the captain down on a clear stretch of floor. The businessman from earlier, the one who had mocked Malcolm before, stared in shock. You saved him," he stammered. Malcolm wiped sweat from his brow. "That's what I do." Then a new scream. Malcolm's head snapped toward the back of the cabin, where the mother and young boy were still trapped behind debris, and the fire was closing in fast. The fire was everywhere now. It devoured what was left of the fuselage, crawling up the walls, spitting out thick black smoke that choked the air. The heat was suffocating, turning the cabin into a death trap. And, at the very back, trapped beneath a collapsed row of seats, was the young boy and his mother. "Help us," the woman screamed, her arms wrapped tightly around her son. The boy sobbed into her chest, his small hands gripping his toy plane. Malcolm didn't hesitate. He moved fast, pushing past panicked passengers who were scrambling toward the exits. Lisa and the co-pilot were still tending to the injured, but they shot him a desperate look. "We can't get to them." Lisa coughed, her voice strained from the smoke. "The fire's cutting us off." Malcolm saw that the flames were closing in from both sides. In minutes, the mother and son would be completely engulfed. No, not if he could stop it. He grabbed a torn piece of fabric from a fallen seat and wrapped it around his nose and mouth, then charged forward. The heat burned against his skin, sweat dripping from his brow as he reached the wreckage, pinning the two victims down. "Hold on," he yelled, bracing himself. He pushed against the heavy seat, his muscles straining. It didn't budge. The boy's cries grew louder. The flames crackled closer. Malcolm's mind raced. The fire had compromised the plane's structure. He didn't have time to lift the seats. But maybe he could break them apart. He scanned the wreckage and spotted a loose metal rod, part of the broken overhead compartment. Grabbing it, he jammed it between the seats, using it as a lever. He pressed down with all his strength. The metal groaned, shifted, snapped. The seat collapsed inward, just enough for the mother to pull her son free. Malcolm grabbed the boy first, hoisting him up. "Go to her," he shouted, tossing the boy toward Lisa, who caught him. Now the mother. She reached for Malcolm, eyes wide with terror. He grabbed her arm and pulled. A sudden explosion rocked the plane. Malcolm lost his footing. The fire roared, the oxygen igniting instantly. A wall of flames erupted between him and the others. Lisa screamed, reaching for him, but the heat forced her back. The young boy sobbed, his hands reaching out. No. Malcolm's mind sharpened, blocking out. The heat, the smoke, the chaos. He wasn't dying here. Through the haze, he saw a hole in the fuselage, where the impact had ripped open part of the plane side. It was risky, but it was his only shot. Turning back to the mother, he shouted over the flames, "Follow me." He grabbed a nearby seat cushion and used it to shield them as they pushed forward. Every step burned, but Malcolm kept moving. They reached the opening as Shear dropped to the ground below. "No time to think. Jump," Malcolm ordered. The mother hesitated for only a second before throwing herself through the gap. Malcolm followed, landing hard on the dirt below. His body screamed in pain, but they were alive. Above them, the fire raged, consuming what was left of the plane. Lisa and the boy ran to them. The child flung himself into his mother's arms, sobbing. Malcolm exhaled, chest heaving. He looked up at the wreckage, knowing this nightmare wasn't over. And then a shadow moved in the smoke. Someone else was still inside. Malcolm barely had time to catch his breath before he saw a shadow shifting inside the wreckage, barely visible through the thick smoke. Someone was still inside. Lisa saw it too. Who else is in there?" she stammered, still holding the crying boy close. Malcolm squinted through the haze. The flames were spreading fast, licking at the broken walls of the fuselage, sending up waves of blistering heat. If there was anyone still inside, they didn't have long. Then he saw a figure darting through the cabin, hunched over, moving with purpose rather than panic. Not a victim, not a crew member. Someone running, someone hiding. Malcolm's gut clenched. That wasn't right. Most of the passengers had either escaped or were trapped and screaming for help. But this person wasn't calling for help. They were trying not to be seen. Lisa must have realized it too. That someone's running. Before Malcolm could think, he was moving again, ignoring the sharp pain in his ribs as he sprinted toward the wreckage. "Malcolm, wait." Lisa called after him, but he was already climbing back inside. The heat was unbearable. Smoke burned his throat. The fire had consumed half the cabin now, metal groaning under the heat. And then footsteps. Malcolm turned toward the sound, his firefighter instincts screaming at him. This wasn't just a lost passenger. The shadow vanished deeper into the plane, slipping behind a row of overturned seats. Malcolm pushed forward, moving carefully. "Hey, if you can hear me, we need to get out of here. The plane's gonna blow." No answer. Malcolm took another step. His boot hit something hard. He looked down. A black duffel bag, zipped shut, untouched by the flames. Something about it felt wrong. Malcolm crouched down, his instincts buzzing. The duffel wasn't a normal carry-on bag. It was too rugged, too tightly secured. His fingers hovered over the zipper. Then a click. Malcolm froze. Not from the bag. From behind him. The cold edge of a knife pressed against his neck. "You don't want to do that," a voice whispered. Malcolm stayed completely still. The smoke made it hard to see, but he could feel the presence behind him, controlled, deliberate, dangerous. He could also feel something else. The knife, the grip, wasn't steady. Whoever this was, they weren't a professional killer. They were scared, desperate. Malcolm slowly raised his hands. "We don't have time for this," he said, keeping his voice calm. "This whole plane is about to boom." A section of the fuselage collapsed, sending a blast of heat and sparks through the cabin. The person behind him stumbled, their grip faltering. Malcolm moved instantly. He spun, knocking the knife aside, and grabbed the figure by the wrist. A man, early 30s, sweating, breathing hard. His eyes were wild with fear. And Malcolm recognized him. He had seen this man boarding the plane, sitting near the back, alone, quiet. Nothing unusual. But now, everything was unusual. Malcolm's gaze flicked back to the duffel bag. "What's in there?" The man yanked away, eyes darting toward the flames. Calculating. Then he made his choice. He bolted. Malcolm lunged, grabbing for him, but the man was fast. He slipped past, disappearing into the burning wreckage. Malcolm cursed, turning back to the bag. He didn't have time to chase the guy. The fire was getting worse. He grabbed the duffel and ran. As he jumped out of the wreckage, landing hard on the ground, Lisa rushed toward him. Who was that?" "I don't know," Malcolm admitted. He looked down at the duffel bag, feeling the weight of something dangerous inside. But we need to find out. Malcolm landed hard, the duffel bag still clutched in his hand. His lungs burned from the smoke, but he forced himself up. The heat from the wreckage behind him was relentless, waves of fire devouring the remains of the plane. Lisa rushed to his side, her eyes flicking between the bag and the burning wreckage. "What the hell is that?" Malcolm didn't answer. His mind was racing. That man, he wasn't just a scared survivor. He was running from something. And now Malcolm was holding it. A shape stirred nearby. The young boy and his mother, still huddled together. The businessman, the one who had mocked Malcolm before, stood a few feet away, staring at the bag with an expression Malcolm couldn't quite place. Then a new voice cut through the chaos. "Drop the bag." Malcolm turned sharply. A man was stepping toward him, tall, lean, wearing a torn button-up and a face smeared with soot. But his eyes were steady, focused. Too focused. Malcolm instinctively shifted, putting himself between the stranger and Lisa. "Who are you?" The man stopped a few feet away. "I'm the person who needs that bag." Malcolm's grip tightened. He could feel something inside the duffel, solid, heavy, secured. Whatever it wasn't luggage. Lisa took a step closer, her breath shallow. You were on the plane." The man nodded. "That's right." Malcolm stared him down. "Then where the hell were you when everyone else was screaming for help?" A flicker of something passed through the man's face. "Handling things." Malcolm's instincts screamed at him. This wasn't just some unlucky passenger. "Open the bag," the man said. No, the stranger exhaled, his expression tightening. "I don't think you understand. That bag doesn't belong to you." Malcolm took a step forward. "And I don't think you understand that I just dragged people out of that wreckage. I don't trust anyone who was running and hiding when the rest of us were fighting to survive." A tense silence fell between them. The businessman cleared his throat nervously. Maybe we should just see what's inside." Malcolm's jaw clenched. He didn't like being told what to do, but something in his gut told him that he needed to know. Slowly, keeping his eyes locked on the stranger, he knelt and unzipped the bag. Lisa gasped. Inside the duffel were stacks of sealed documents, a secured hard drive, and a gun. Malcolm's stomach dropped. Lisa backed away instantly. "What the hell?" The stranger moved fast. Before Malcolm could react, the man lunged, shoving him backward and grabbing for the bag. Malcolm reacted on instinct, swinging the duffel away from him and landing a solid punch to the man's ribs. The stranger staggered, but didn't go down. Then chaos. The businessman grabbed the gun from the bag. Lisa screamed. The mother clutched her son tighter. "Everyone stop!" Malcolm barked, holding up his hands. The businessman's hands shook, but he kept the gun raised. What the hell is going on?" "Who even are you?" The stranger, still clutching his side, stared at the gun with surprising calmness. Then he looked up at Malcolm. "I told you," he said. "I need that bag." Malcolm's mind raced. A hidden passenger, a duffel full of classified documents, a gun, and a plane crash that, now that he thought about it, didn't feel like an accident anymore. The businessman's hands shook as he held the gun, his breaths ragged. No one moved. The heat from the wreckage burned the back of Malcolm's neck, but he kept his focus locked on the stranger, the man who had been running from the duffel bag. Lisa's voice trembled. "Malcolm, what is this?" Malcolm didn't answer, because deep down he already knew. This wasn't just a random crash. This was something else. And this man, whoever he was, knew why. The stranger, still calm despite the tension, eyed the gun in the businessman's hands. "You don't know how to use that." The businessman swallowed hard. "Try me." Malcolm raised a hand. "Put the gun down. No one's shooting anyone." The businessman didn't budge. His breathing was erratic, sweat dripping from his temple. "Are you insane?" That guy, he jabbed the gun toward the stranger, was hiding on the plane, with a bag full of classified crap and a gun. The young mother clutched her son tighter, whispering reassurances he was too terrified to believe. Malcolm's mind raced. Think. Prioritize. De-escalate. He took a step forward toward the businessman. Look at me, he said steadily. That thing in your hands? It's not helping us right now. You're not trained to use it. If something happens, people get hurt. So lower it. The businessman's grip tightened. Before he could decide, the stranger moved. In a single fluid motion, he lunged, grabbing the gunman's wrist and twisting it. The businessman cried out, and the gun went flying straight toward Malcolm. Malcolm caught it. Everything froze. Lisa gasped. The mother shielded her child, and the stranger smiled. That's better, the man said, brushing dust off his torn shirt. Now we can talk. Malcolm wasn't sure if he wanted to punch him or shoot him. Instead, he flicked the gun's safety on and tossed it into the duffel bag, zipping it shut. Start talking, Malcolm growled. Right now. The stranger exhaled, rubbing his wrist where he had grabbed the businessman. Fine. You want the truth. Malcolm's jaw tightened. Now. The man looked toward the burning wreckage, eyes darkening. The crash wasn't an accident. Lisa stiffened. What? The plane was targeted. The stranger's voice was grim. I was on board because of that. He nodded at the duffel bag in Malcolm's grip. What's inside that bag? It's evidence. And someone didn't want it to make it to New York. Malcolm's stomach turned to stone. You're saying someone brought down the plane on purpose? The man nodded once. Lisa looked horrified. That's insane. There were over 200 people on board. The stranger's expression didn't waver. You think I don't know that? Malcolm clenched his fists. If that's true, then who did this? The stranger hesitated for the first time. He glanced at the treeline, as if suddenly aware of how exposed they were. Then, quietly, he said they might still be watching. Malcolm's pulse spiked. He scanned the dense jungle surrounding them. Had someone survived the crash? Were they out there right now waiting? Lisa took a step closer to Malcolm. We need to get out of here. The stranger nodded. Agreed. He extended his hand. Ethan Cole, FBI. Malcolm didn't take the hand. Not yet. But the pieces were falling into place. A hidden federal agent. A classified duffel bag. A plane crash that wasn't an accident. And somewhere out there, the people responsible were still watching. Malcolm didn't shake Ethan Cole's hand. He barely breathed. His firefighter instincts screamed at him this wasn't over. The crash, the flames, the bodies still trapped in the wreckage, none of it was random. Someone had done this. And, if Ethan was right, whoever was responsible might still be out there. Watching. Waiting. Lisa was the first to break the silence. We have to tell the rescue team, she said, glancing at the treeline like she expected something to emerge from the jungle at any moment. Ethan shook his head. No, not yet. Lisa stared at him. What? If we radio for help, we'll get the wrong kind of attention. Ethan's expression was grim. The people who did this, they're professionals. If they know I survived, they'll come to clean up the mess. Malcolm's grip tightened on the duffel bag. And what exactly is in here that's worth killing 200 people? Ethan didn't flinch. Enough to expose people who don't want to be exposed. A sharp crack echoed through the trees. Everyone froze. Malcolm turned toward the sound, his muscles tensing. Lisa gasped, clutching the boy's shoulders. The businessman paled, glancing wildly at the jungle. What was that? He whispered. Malcolm scanned the shadows between the trees. The fire's glow didn't reach far beyond the wreckage, but the forest felt different now. Tense. Waiting. Another sound, this time closer. A twig snapping. Someone was out there. Malcolm met Ethan's gaze. Friend of yours? Ethan's expression darkened. Not likely. Malcolm set the duffel bag down, stepping forward. If they're coming, I say we stop waiting and find out who they are. Lisa grabbed his arm. Are you crazy? What if they have weapons? Malcolm pried her fingers off. Then I'd rather face them before they decide to use them. He took a step toward the trees. The businessman shook his head furiously. No way. I'm not standing around waiting to get shot. Ethan shot him a glare. You'd rather run into the jungle, blind, while someone out there might already be hunting us? The businessman shut up. Malcolm pushed forward, stepping carefully into the tree line. The darkness swallowed him almost immediately. The sounds of the jungle buzzed in his ears, distant insects, rustling leaves, the crackling fire behind him. And then a voice, low, whispered, "Find a bag." Malcolm's stomach clenched. He turned his head just enough to see two figures moving between the trees, barely visible in the dim glow of the distant flames. One carried a rifle, the other a radio, pressed against his lips as he murmured words Malcolm couldn't hear. They were looking for the duffel bag. Malcolm's mind raced. They had seconds before these men realized where they were. He needed to make a decision: fight or hide. Slowly, he moved back toward the wreckage, careful to keep silent. As soon as he broke through the trees, he grabbed the duffel bag and shoved it toward Ethan. "We've got company," Malcolm muttered. Ethan's jaw tightened. "How many?" "At least two. Armed." Lisa gasped, pulling the boy closer. "Oh my God." The businessman backed away, panic rising in his expression. "We have to get out of here, now." Malcolm shook his head. "We run, they'll pick us off. We stay, we might have a chance." Ethan was already moving. He grabbed the gun from the bag, checking the magazine before looking at Malcolm. "You ready for this?" Malcolm exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "Let's find out." The jungle felt smaller now, like the trees were pressing in, suffocating the air between them. Two armed men were out there, searching for the duffel bag Malcolm had just handed to Ethan. And they weren't the type to ask questions. Lisa gripped the boy's shoulders tightly, her voice barely a whisper. "Malcolm, what do we do?" Malcolm didn't answer immediately. His instincts were screaming firefighters didn't train for ambushes. He was used to running into burning buildings, not dodging bullets in the middle of nowhere. But fear didn't help anyone. "Lisa, take the boy," Malcolm said quietly. "Stay low, move toward the clearing, and don't stop unless you have to." Lisa's eyes went wide. "What? We can't just leave you here." "You're not leaving," Malcolm said firmly. "You're getting out of the crossfire." The businessman, still shaking, pointed toward the dark tree-line. "And what about them? What if they see us?" Ethan tightened his grip on the gun. "They will. But by then, we'll make sure they have other problems." Malcolm nodded. "Exactly." Lisa hesitated, but she knew better than to argue. She pulled the boy close and started guiding him toward the shadows at the edge of the wreckage, her movements slow and controlled. The businessman hesitated for a moment before following, his face pale but determined. Then, a single snap of a branch. Malcolm turned sharply. One of the men emerged from the tree-line, rifle raised, his face shadowed beneath the glow of the burning wreckage. His gaze locked onto them instantly. "Move!" Malcolm shouted. Lisa and the boy dropped low and ran. The businessman bolted behind them. And then the first shot rang out. The bullet slammed into a chunk of wreckage inches from Malcolm's head, sending metal shards flying. The gunman adjusted. Aiming again, Ethan fired first. The gun's muzzle flashed, and the man stumbled back, dropping his rifle as he clutched his shoulder. He wasn't dead, but he was down. Malcolm's heart pounded. That was too close. But before he could process it, the second man appeared. He moved fast, stepping over his wounded partner and pulling a pistol from his belt. His gun snapped up, but Malcolm was already moving. He grabbed a broken seat from a wreckage, lifted it, and threw it as hard as he could. The seat slammed into the gunman's chest, knocking him backward. He fired a wild shot, missing entirely. Ethan took the opportunity. He rushed forward, driving his knee into the guy's stomach before slamming his fist across his face. The man collapsed, unconscious, before he hit the ground. Silence fell. Malcolm's chest heaved, his breath ragged. The entire exchange had lasted seconds, but his body felt like it had just run through a collapsing building. Lisa's voice cut through the stillness. "Malcolm." He turned. Lisa and the boy had stopped at the edge of the clearing. And then Malcolm saw why. A third figure stood in the darkness, barely visible. A woman. She wasn't like the other men. No rifle. No heavy gear. She was wearing dark clothing, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. And in her hand, she held a radio. Slowly, She raised it to her lips. Malcolm's stomach dropped. She wasn't here to fight. She was here to call in reinforcements. Malcolm didn't hesitate. The moment he saw the woman raise the radio to her lips, he knew if she got a call out, they were dead. No more second chances. No more running. Whoever she was calling wouldn't be coming to negotiate. Stop her. Malcolm barked. Ethan was already moving. He raised his gun, aiming directly at her hand. Bang! The shot missed by inches, but it was enough. The woman jerked her hand back, the radio slipping from her grip and clattering onto the ground. But she didn't freeze. She was fast. In one smooth motion, she pivoted, her foot kicking up the radio before Malcolm could reach it. It flipped through the air, and she caught it. She pressed the button. Echo team, survivors confirmed. Need immediate. Malcolm tackled her. The impact knocked them both down, the radio flying from her hand. They hit the dirt hard, rolling in the dust, Malcolm fighting for control. The woman was trained. Her elbow drove into his ribs, sending a burst of pain through his side. She twisted, trying to get free, but Malcolm had been wrestling flames his whole life. He used his weight, forcing her onto her stomach, pinning her wrist against the dirt. She fought like hell. Too much for just an ordinary hitman. Ethan sprinted forward and grabbed the radio. Without hesitation, he smashed it against a rock, shattering it into pieces. The woman froze. Malcolm could feel her chest rising and falling, fast, furious. She knew just like they did her chance was gone. But instead of panicking, she smiled. "You think that stops them?" she breathed. Malcolm's grip tightened. "Who the hell are you?" The woman exhaled, like she was deciding whether to bother answering. Finally, she spoke. "You have something you shouldn't." Her eyes flicked toward the duffel bag, still slung over Ethan's shoulder. "They won't let you leave with it." Malcolm glanced at Ethan. The agent's face was stone cold, but his grip on the bag tightened. Lisa stepped closer, her voice wavering. "Who's they?" The woman chuckled. "If I told you, you wouldn't live long enough to care." Malcolm had heard enough. He turned to Ethan. "We need to move. Now." Ethan nodded. Agreed. Malcolm turned back to the woman. "You're coming with us." For the first time, her smile faded. "That's a mistake." Malcolm didn't care. He hauled her up by the arm, keeping her close as Ethan took the lead. Lisa gathered the young boy, the businessman trailing behind, his face still pale. Then a sound. Low. Mechanical. Growing louder. Malcolm's blood ran cold. A helicopter. Ethan cursed under his breath. Damn it. That was their backup. Lisa clutched the child tighter. "What do we do?" Malcolm looked at Ethan. "That bag, how important is it?" Ethan's jaw clenched. "Enough to burn a plane out of the sky." Malcolm exhaled sharply. Then they had only one option. "We run." And as the spotlight from the helicopter broke through the trees, the group vanished into the jungle, the fire behind them, and the hunt just beginning. The plane crash was just the beginning. A mystery hidden in the wreckage. A team of survivors fighting for their lives. And now they're being hunted. What would you do in their place? Would you run? Would you fight? And most importantly, who can you really trust? Let us know where in the world you're watching from in the comments. And if you don't want to miss what happens next, subscribe to the channel now. More twists, more action, and more edge of your seat moments are coming your way. Hit that subscribe button.